going to go ahead and say, let's get started on this robotics themed town hall. So I just want to say thank you again for everyone joining us. I'm Rachel Robinson, Vice President of MedTech, and we have been so honored to share the last, I think we just said 13 town halls with you during this really incredible time of coming together as a community. So thank you. We appreciate you taking your lunch hour on Thursdays to chat with us and learn and network. And I can't say that this is going to be a very boring program. I think this is going to be one that's really exciting, and you're going to learn a lot from our speakers. So before we get started, just a little housekeeping. If you take a look at your computers, just make sure if you're not speaking, you're on mute so we don't get a lot of background noise. It helps keep the continuity on the video for the speakers. And if you have questions, they are highly encouraged. You can use the chat button to pop them into the chat, and we'll help moderate Q&A for each of our speakers. Otherwise, you can just raise your hand and we'll call on you when it's time for Q&A. So like I said, we have three incredible speakers that I'm going to tee up in just a minute. But Brian, I thought I'd turn it over to you in case you had anything you wanted to share.
I just want to echo my gratitude for everyone's time as we've transitioned to more of a virtual events company. A lot of this programming has been experimental. We've been trying new things, and you know, every week we're just very pleased that you guys have come along with us for the ride. We have three great speakers today on a key critical sector for the medical device industry. You know, the future essentially of the MedTech industry. I think the coronavirus is going to accelerate robotics in healthcare. I believe that with every fiber of my being. I also want to just call your attention to a couple things that we have going on. We have the first of our webinars with our new partner TriNet next week. And that's going to be on R&D tax credits and how you can take advantage of those. I think that's a really important program that all of you that are in sort of R&D phase or conducting R&D should be involved in, because it enables you to actually get cash back in your pocket and for your investors. So it's a key critical program. It's one of the many ways that we're working to bring important issues affecting the MedTech community right to your desktop. In addition, you know, we had a great webinar this week on the New England Edge program, which is the discount program that you can take advantage of through MedTech. That's going to be, it's up on our YouTube page. I really encourage you to take a look, find out how to really maximize your membership in MedTech. Our members are achieving some incredible savings at some very important key life science vendors. And that program is very critical to our success as an organization. Otherwise, we're, you know, for the summer, we're still working on our programming. We're going to be a little less frequent. We're going to try and retool here for the fall a little bit. So we'll still have some programming, but it's going to be a little less frequent, but we're still going to have town halls periodically throughout the next 2 months. It's hard to believe we're almost in July, but here we are. So I just want to say thank you again for your time. We understand how valuable it is, and I want to thank all of our speakers today for sharing their insights.
Thanks, Brian. And definitely had a moment just there where you said we're almost in July, and I thought, oh, we're not there yet? Okay, great. No clue what day it is, but this is so great. So we're going to get started with our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Norbert Johnson, Vice President of Robotics at Globus Medical. And he's going to share with us some of the things that Globus have been working on and really just give us his thoughts on the industry as a whole. So Norbert, I will let you take it over.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to discussing with you. So I have a presentation here, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm assuming that's okay.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Let's see here. Okay. And can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Globus Medical, who we are, and a bit about our product, the Excelsius GPS. So Globus Medical was founded in 2003 by David Paul, and it's a company that's based outside of Philadelphia in Audubon. Sorry about the pop-up there. And so they are a spinal implant company, and they focused on pedicle screws, rods, and really interbodies. And they were the first ones to offer an expandable interbody, right? And so that goes into where the disc space would be, and they can kind of change the height of that. In that time, they put out about 16 new products every year. They've just created an amazing product development engine. They went public in 2012, and they were considered at one point the fastest growing orthopedics company. In 2013, they acquired a small startup in Phoenix called Excelsius Surgical, and that's really what started this robotics movement for Globus. So our general philosophy at Globus, we're really an engineering-driven company, but it's engineers can't do it alone. So engineers and surgeons are essentially put together in labs, right? And we develop and we test and we work through things, and it's really fantastic. I've been in med device since the late 90s, and it wasn't until I came to Globus that I actually did the procedures on cadavers, right? It's one thing to kind of design things. I'm in the area of navigation, and so much that we would design without having that feel. And that was one of the things I really liked about the Globus philosophy, is really teaching the engineers how to do the procedures. Obviously, we can't do them on actual patients, but the more you can teach them, the better. And as a company, we want to have expertise in the procedures, the implants, instruments, and the systems. And so we'll talk a bit about the systems today. We listen to our customers, our surgeons, and we develop quickly, and we really agonize over workflow. And you guys know, as med device guys, workflow is everything. Time is so important in the operating room. So it all started with Excelsius Surgical. It was founded by Dr. Nick Theodore, Neil Crawford, and Mitch Foster. Nick was a spine surgeon, neurosurgeon at the BNI. He's now the chief of spine at Johns Hopkins. And we've been working closely with him ever since this acquisition. I was asked to come on board and start this division within Globus. My background's in navigation. I was one of the founders of the O-arm imaging system that we sold to Medtronic. So if you're in this space, you would know that. It's an X-ray system for the operating room. We affectionately call this system Old Blue, and this is where it all started. So where are we? So we are located in Massachusetts. So even though corporate's in Philadelphia, I stayed here in Mass and started this group. So we're just north of the city in Methuen. We bought a building, so we got plenty of space. And we have manufacturing on site. We follow all lean manufacturing principles. And we built every robot right here in Methuen. And that's going really well. We launched our product in 2017. We did our first case with Nick at Johns Hopkins. And if you look at all of our competitors, not really our competitors, but other surgical robotic products, we're the fastest to hit 50 installs. So we just had an incredible launch. It was a lot for us to kind of figure this all out, being our first big piece of capital as Globus, which was an implant company. And you can imagine we had to build a sales force, field service organization, clinical specialists. There was a lot that went into that. And I'm really proud of everybody, just how fast that came together and the caliber of individual we were able to hire. So Excelsius Surgical, what is Excelsius? We've been talking about this robot. And so really for us, it's about doing spinal robotics smarter, faster, stronger, right? Those are the three major things. And so we have this robotic platform on wheels, and let me kind of just walk you through what it is. So we'll kind of get a little more techie here. So smarter. So for us, it's not just a robotic platform, but it's integrating navigation inherently into this robotic platform. So we track the patient. And this has been done in navigation for a long time, but we've been able to innovate things like a surveillance marker. Let me just pause that. Another big advancement that we did is with our robotic design is we have this kind of universal mount point where we can put different end effectors on the robot depending on what you want to do. So as a platform technology, we can expand this for different procedures of spine, or as we look into cranial procedures, or even other procedures after that. So it's a platform that you can build upon. But another nice feature here is we actually track the end directly, which removes all the errors that are due to forward kinematics in the arm. So it allows us to have really a top-notch accuracy. And then we also track the instruments. So although it's a robotic system, oops, let me go back 1 second. I apologize on that. Okay. So one of the nice features that we have, although it's a robotic system, it's also a freehand navigation system. So all of our instruments are tracked directly as well. So, you know, for certain aspects of the procedure, you might not need the robotic arm and you don't have to use it. You can use it as a conventional freehand system. So faster, you know, as I talked about workflow, we tried to adapt for what the hospital is currently doing. So for some workflows, they have CAT scanners right in radiology and call that the pre-op scan. So they bring the pre-op scan in, they bring a C-arm in, they'll take 2 shots AP lateral, and we can register those to their pre-op image. Some hospitals have intraoperative CT, such as this. This is an O-arm here. This is the product that I helped develop. I was one of the founders of. And so this does a CT right in surgery. So the door closes, you can take a 3-dimensional CT image right there in surgery. We could bring that over. And then another modality that we have is just fluoroscopy. So you could bring a C-arm in, take an AP lateral shot, and just do everything on 2D imaging and navigate on that. So we gave them that flexibility of workflow. And that made all the difference. And then finally, stronger. It's really about, when you're in orthopedics and spine, we're dealing with high forces. These guys use mallets, they pound. So we built a robot to be able to handle that. We call it a bit of a gentle giant. So we have a stabilizing system here, and it locks to the floor. We got this really rigid arm. You could hang 200 pounds off of this arm. Very, very low backlash, very repeatable and accurate. So just kind of putting it all together, this is what a procedure would look like. So I'm highlighting here a single position lateral system. So here are navigated instruments. We have disc prep instruments. We can place inner bodies. So it's showing here on the software how we plan. So you can plan a screw in less than a minute. You just drag it, you move it to where you want it, and you can plan the entire construct. You select the screw that you're interested in, the robot will move right there. So in this configuration, the patient's literally on their side. Most of these procedures, the patients will be on their side for inner body placement, then they have to flip them. So using the robot, you can actually put the screws on with the patient at orientation, saving a lot of time for the surgeon. So here they're putting these pedicle screws all the way in this orientation. You're talking millimeters from spinal cord. There's a spinal cord in the actual slice. So the final step is the inner body placement. So this is the part that's in between the disc space. So you can go ahead and plan right where you want it. And we have some other features for the robot that allow them to do that. I'm just going to kind of skip ahead here. So really for us, it's the way, we're trying to change the way surgery is done by looking at both implants and instruments and systems and having them work seamlessly together to really enhance patient care, improve the surgeon experience, and to drive efficiencies. So that's my pitch. Hope that was clear.
Robert, that was great. Thank you so much. So I've had the pleasure of coming up and touring the Globus factory, and it's just remarkable feats of engineering you guys have done. Just curious, in terms of current events, in terms of sourcing, how much different components go into one of your robotic systems? I mean, it seems like it's a huge number of interconnected parts.
As far as sourcing interconnected, yeah, well, I mean, so we're using a lot of off the shelf, right? Motion controllers, motors, all of that kind of stuff, right? We're not gearboxes, we're not making any of that. So we're using a lot of the suppliers that would be used in industry. So there's really nothing special there. Pretty much everything else I'd probably say is custom, right? From cables to, you know, whether it's machine metal or rim, you know, skins. I'd imagine very typical of most med devices. We have a lot of local suppliers here in Mass and Southern New Hampshire. And then, you know, quite a few are overseas, like we use Sanyo motors, for example, right? And we're using an Elmo motion controller, which is distributed locally, but I think that's an Israeli company. So.
Okay, so we have a question here from the audience. Can you talk about faster procedures? Maybe you could share anything quantitative about how much faster.
Yes, I don't have. So quantitative, like I'm not going to be able to regurgitate, say, a study that was done, but what I can kind of tell you in general is we're trying to enable minimally invasive procedures. So in spine, a lot of procedures are done with very large incisions, right? So you can see the spine and you can put the screws in. And with this technology, by enabling minimally invasive procedures, what happens is you're preserving the muscle, right? You're not having to go all the way down to bone and all that time that it takes. But then in doing minimally invasive procedures, sometimes it adds more time. Things like trying to put a rod through those screws could be actually quite challenging when it's an MIS procedure. So what the surgeons have found is, when you plan your screws, you're not just planning an individual screw, you're actually planning an entire construct, right? So now I can make sure that those screw heads are aligned so that when I'm trying to snake my rod in, it goes right in and you're not fighting it. From the time they plan the screw to placing the screw, it literally takes minutes. It's just super fast. The robot moves there. You're not fighting it. You're not trying to have to find your spot. They don't have to go to the other side of the table. The robot arm moves to the other side and they can stay on their side and actually put the screws in. So definitely faster from that perspective. Whether we're taking 30 minutes off, I'm not actually sure. It really depends on the procedure. If you talk about the single position lateral, we're probably taking an hour off the procedure because they literally have to reset up, maybe even more. One of the most exciting stories I heard, though, is one of the surgeons that really started doing these single position laterals. The patients were going home the same day. There was that little blood loss, that quick of a procedure. That's really exciting stuff that you could have spine surgery and go home same day.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how about, here's another question about improved outcomes versus manual approaches. I'm sure that seems to be the $1 million question with robotic surgery, right? In terms of outcomes compared to manual. Any research you guys have done on that you can share?
I don't have any really long-term outcome data on that. No, not that I can share.
Okay. How about hours of training? It's a complicated system.
Yep. Do
you have clinical trainers attending procedures? How long does it take for a surgeon to become proficient?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if you're new to navigation and robotics, you'd come to our facility. We have a really state-of-the-art cadaver lab set up. We would train the surgeon. Their instrumentation rep would come as well, and any of their staff that they want to be there. So they would come and spend an entire day with us in our labs and just go through those procedures. And we focus on the procedures that they want to do. We don't have to teach them all of the procedures, just kind of the ones they do. And then we have clinical specialists that will be there in surgery with them. Honestly, until they're ready to be independent, whether that's 10 cases or 20 cases, that's probably the ballpark where we find most people are pretty proficient. And it's obviously like anything, it's not just the surgeon, it's the whole staff. It's just got to fit into that workflow and everyone kind of has to know what they have to do. But the adoption has been going really well.
I think that was my question too, if you don't mind me chiming in about adoption, right? How have you seen people react to using the product, right? Do they feel, very comfortable? Is it kind of a harder thing for folks to get used to? How has that been going?
So having a background in, we call it freehand navigation, where you're not using robotic guidance, right? It's all navigation. And having been in the early days of navigation, if you haven't tried a navigated instrument and you literally try to go to a point and looking at a computer screen, it's tricky. There's an art there. Some surgeons are amazing at it and they make it look so easy. But when you try it yourself, if you're not used to it, there is a fairly steep learning curve. What I like about the robot is it takes all that out. So we just get you on the path that you need to go. And so it's really much faster from that perspective. And then you get this rigid arm kind of holding you there. So learning curve wise, it's pretty easy that way. You don't really have that art. We just kind of bring you there. You can look at the screen, you got this stable base. We've brought sales guys into the lab that barely knew what a spine was when they got started, right, before their training. And they were able to plan screws and put screws in accurately. Just to kind of show you that it's pretty easy to show. You saw what it was. You drag a screw. If you know the anatomy, you kind of know where the pedicle screw needs to go. And after that, the robot moves there. Obviously, you want the expertise of the surgeon to ensure that things are correct and that you're registered accurately and all those other safety considerations.
Robert, I have a couple, just two sort of big picture questions for you. The first being, are you getting enough talent in the Massachusetts area in terms of to meet the demands that you have? I know Globus has been very successful. And then secondly, just big picture in terms of robotics. We have so many different robotic systems right now being introduced, and well, I guess they're matured to the point where they're on the market. Um, is there ever going to be a point where there's going to be a push from hospitals, perhaps because of budget constraints or what have you, that we really consolidate all of these into one system that does several different things?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, like in the early days of navigation, we were somewhat agnostic, right, to different, say, implant companies. I will say, you know, being part of an implant company, it sure does make our life a lot easier, right? Because we know exactly what we're going to support. And I think in these times, it's kind of scary being a robotic player without having that tie into implants. Because it also helps in the way you sell these things, right? They're very expensive, and you can do some things in selling, having that implant business as well. So yeah. I guess that answers your question, right?
Yeah, I mean, and then in terms of talent, are you sourcing?
Oh yeah, the talent, sure.
Because you have an R&D facility up there in Methuen. I mean, how's it going in terms of
talent
yeah
flow? No, absolutely. You know, it's like anything, we were, you know, essentially a small startup ourselves. Nobody knew who Globus was, and so obviously that makes it a little harder to attract good talent. We are, you know, north of the city, just north of Andover here, but there's, you know, quite a few big med device companies here, although some are moving. Philips Medical moving down south, but we've actually done really well. We have had some times over the last few years where I think for all of us, right, it's just difficult hiring people, right? The job market's real tight, but we've tried to hold our bar of quality individuals that we want to hire, and we've typically have been able to attract people locally, but we have moved people in from other areas of the country as well.
Great. And then one last question from me, and I'm just going to kind of combine one that came in on the chat bot in terms of impact from COVID over the past 4 months. First, from a supply chain question, I mean, have you seen any shortages because of international supply or parts becoming obsolete? And B, I mean, are you forced to do different any creative selling models to hospitals with constrained budgets?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as a supply chain question goes, we were actually in a fortunate spot. Like we had a nice bit of inventory kind of established, and with a lot of these elective procedures, they were kind of on hold anyway. So, you know, not that it's great, but you know, we were able to kind of stop manufacturing for a little while because we were in good shape. Supply chain wise, we're definitely seeing longer lead times, and that's affecting schedules for sure. I think we have enough buffer for current installs. It's probably hurting more of the R&D efforts that are going on as we're trying to hit our schedules. So that's not helping. Yeah.
And okay, then, I think we have one last question. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
And I'm sorry, I can understand if you don't want to talk about sales. I was just curious. I mean, is there, like you said, these are very expensive systems in general. All robotic systems are. Any thoughts on, and I don't know, in terms of R&D, if you handle this, but as creative sort of selling programs that you guys are doing with hospitals right now?
Yeah, I mean, I probably won't talk too much about sales. That's not really in my group. I just know, like I said before, you know, being an implant company, there's a lot that can be done there, and we have just a fantastic sales team that they're really good at selling. So things are working out pretty good for us.
That's all. Thank you so much for your patience, and then it's just I think this is an amazing company that's up there in Methuen that not enough people know about, frankly, that are associated with Massachusetts enough. So I'm just really glad to get the chance to showcase you guys today.
I did see one question go by real quick. It's just the one question was less X-rays for the surgeon and staff with this technology, and absolutely, that's one of the big selling points. Is that there's such a reduction of X-rays to the surgeon and staff, particularly with the intraoperative workflow. They essentially get zero because they step out of the room, and that's a huge selling point, right? That's a big consideration for us. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Norbert, and thanks for seeing that last question. That was me trying to interrupt Brian a second ago to make sure that one got in. So that's great. So I think this is a good time now to introduce our next speaker, Todd Usen from Activ Surgical. Pardon me. So he's the CEO over there and has just been doing some incredible work. And Todd, I'd love for you to share what you all are working on.
Can you hear me okay?
Sounds great.
Great. Thank you, group. It's in this unique time of pandemic. First of all, thank you, Norbert. It's always great to present with you and next to you and after you. It gives me a lot of challenge to follow you.
You're gonna do great.
The second biggest challenge I've had today, the first one was figuring out where all my button-down shirts were, and can I tuck them into my basketball shorts, which I'm wearing right now at the same time. So sure, we all look good from the top half, but that's I'm sure we can all relate. Anyway, Activ Surgical and myself, I've been with in med device for about 30 years. I've always been a big company guy. I was brought up and cut my teeth at Boston Scientific. My last role there, I ran the United States for our neurovascular business after having the same opportunity with our GI space. Moved over to Smith & Nephew and spent some time in orthopedics. So like what Norbert was just sharing, understand the space. In my last role there, I was the president of all of orthopedics at Smith & Nephew over total joints, recon, trauma, and sports medicine. And then before I came to Activ Surgical, I was the president of all of medical out of Olympus. And we had 6 medical companies. We took that to 11 companies. And I love the big company. I cut my teeth there. And so why am I at Activ Surgical? Well, what I wanted to share today was not really a whole story about Activ, but I also realized that our topics regarding about robotics, but also how the pandemic has affected us, things we need to be thinking about, and what Activ has been able to do during this time, and where we think we may fit in as we move forward. But just to give you a little background, and I'll spend just a couple minutes on this slide to give you a feel. Activ, through Dr. Peter Kim, our founder, when he was at Children's National Medical Center, performed the world's first fully autonomous robotic surgery of soft tissue. Since we became Activ Surgical, we performed the world's first fully autonomous, minimally invasive robotic surgery by adding algorithm and specific work with some form factor. But as you all know, and you probably can relate, if I was relating this to the car world, where autonomous cars are the big rage, nobody, probably not even Elon Musk, went from a regular car to an autonomous car without experience. And the reason I say that is right now, while everyone drives a car or knows about cars, and cars aren't going anywhere, leads us into autonomous cars, robotics are only done in about 6% of minimally invasive surgeries. So before we get to autonomous robotics, we need to help drive the robotic industry as a whole. And an example, what I mean by that is if you think back to whether you drive an autonomous car or not, or whether you're thinking of it, everybody has had a rear view camera in their car for the last 10, 15 years. That rear view camera just provides you data for the driver to make extra decisions. Many cars have a little mark on your side view mirror. For your blind spot, you might have a red triangle, a red light, something that flashes so you don't have to turn over your shoulder anymore. That's, again, just data for the driver. Similarly, some cars, when they switch lanes by mistake, when you're not paying attention, the seat vibrates, the steering wheel vibrates, or it lets you know. These are all signs of data to a driver in a traditional car before they get to autonomous, to get them prepared for whenever that time comes. Similarly, before we go to autonomous robotics, there's no reason that all of the things that we can do by programming an off-the-shelf robot to perform some of the procedures that it's done, that we can't bring a lot of this technology to traditional surgery, that 94% of minimally invasive surgery that's being done before I get to a robot. And what I mean by that is, so we look at a few things that Activ Surgical is doing and focusing on. Providing real-time visual data to all surgeons that's not currently available. What does that mean? Identifying blood flow without the uses of dyes, critical structures, tissue characterization, the fingerprints of tissue, arteries versus veins, all these things that you need identified in surgery without any other mechanical means, so a surgeon can utilize those. If I'm bringing it back to the car example, I probably look at this as original GPS versus Waze. When you first got your GPS in your car, again, 15 years ago, when everyone's sticking those Garmin's on the top of your dashboard, you might put in, I'm going to the airport, it might show you you're 10 miles from the airport, but that could take you an hour depending on traffic. But it was taking you 10 miles because that was the shortest distance. Then Waze comes along, and it may say, I'm not taking you 10 miles to the airport. I'm actually going to take you 15 miles to the airport, but I'm going to save you about 45 minutes because I see what's up ahead, whether it's construction, whether it's road problems, major traffic, an accident, what have you. And that's what Activ Surgical is trying to do for our physicians. We're trying to provide information that is not visible to the naked eye right now to those surgeons in real time, intraoperatively, not pre-op, not post-op, intra-op, at the time of procedure and first order of measure to help those doctors. Then from those procedures, what do we do with it? We do those procedures where, let's say for argument's sake, we're identifying blood flow. We identify the blood flow, and that's a wonderful thing for the doctors in first order of measure for anastomotic leaks and what have you. Then what Dr. Kim has always highlighted, democratizing surgery. Dr. Peter Kim cannot be in every surgery around the world, but Dr. Peter Kim's data can be. And if you look at the pandemic right now, we're hearing a lot about telemedicine and remote access. And it's fantastic that one surgeon can be in the middle of another procedure across the world or across the country with telemedicine. But what if that one surgeon can be in 500 procedures across the world at the same time, in 1,000 procedures across the world at the same time? And that's because her data is across the world at one time. And not just her data, but data from all physicians that have done these cases. So we can get best-in-class surgery no matter where and who is doing procedures. Think about how valuable this is right now. If you're a resident or a fellow during this pandemic, you have not done surgeries. You haven't been able to. Your training it's not going to be lengthened. You're just losing some of your experience. When you get out into surgery, the more data that you have on the screen, the better. And finally, with autonomous collaboration, once we accomplish all of that, then we actually can then start programming our robots. And I've been on a couple of panels recently, actually early March, the last conference I was on a big robotic panel. And one of the questions that was asked to me was, and I just happened to be first on the panel, when do you think robotics will really take off? And I think robotics are amazing. The things that Norbert's sharing, that obviously Intuitive, CMR, Hugo, all the companies. I'm really impressed with the technology. But what makes them so special today is these degrees of freedom, the reach that they have that a surgeon can't get to, the opportunity to do procedures that not everybody can do, the reduction in tremors, the severity, even navigation like Norbert was sharing a little while ago. But in my opinion, and it's been backed up by others, when a robot can start seeing things and identifying things that a surgeon cannot see or identify, that's when I believe robotics will really take off. When a robot can identify sentinel nodes and positive tumor margins, when a robot can identify key critical structures and do geofencing. And geofencing is a great technology that basically, with 3D digital mapping, that is going to protect the organs, protect critical structures. The robot won't be able to go there. It's like a force field. That's when robotics will have the opportunity to take off, when a surgeon can get information from the robot that the surgeon can't see himself or herself. I bring this up because this is real, and I think it's a little undervalued. Why Activ Surgical and why we're not a robotic company, but we're an enabler. Father, 43 years old, Ryan, goes under a colectomy procedure without complication for Crohn's disease, a common disease. After discharge, the patient develops a fever, abdomen pain, goes back to the hospital, and he's basically given medicine for those underlying problems, for those problems, the fever, not the underlying cause of the problem. 2 days later, was admitted back to the hospital with bowel leakage that was found during a CT scan. New surgery was scheduled to repair the leak. Ryan unfortunately develops abdominal compartment syndrome and sepsis, and Ryan passed away in the ICU. 43 years old, father of two. Why? No one really knows, other than situational awareness is one of the largest causes of death in hospitals. And without an adequate blood supply and adequate identification of blood supply, these types of things are happening all too often. The number 3 leading cause of death in the world. I was told, if you're going to go to a small company and you have a technology, see if there's a big problem and see if you can cure that big problem or handle that big problem. It was a really big problem. 3rd leading cause of death after heart attack and cancer in the United States, and after heart attack and ischemic stroke in the world, is preventable medical errors, of which 26% are preventable surgical errors, which means exactly what happened with Ryan. Patients are on the table due to situational awareness, things that a physician cannot always see, key critical structure, common bile duct injuries, ureter injuries, not knowing the vein or artery, cutting vessels that you don't need to cut or can't necessarily identify. 400,000 deaths plus in the US alone from preventable surgical errors, which is part of this preventable medical errors. This is a problem that can be treated and we can handle. And I'm not big on clinical studies at this type of a presentation, but I wanted to just share, we're talking a pandemic now, and I was asked, why in a pandemic do you think we can, the outcome? Hospitals will not be able to afford an extra 15 days of a patient staying in a hospital after an anastomotic leak on a routine bariatric procedure or a routine colorectal procedure, which could be 12 days. The beds aren't going to be available. There's still going to be plenty of beds that are being taken up in hospitals because of the virus. And obviously when surgeons are getting back on their elective surgery, things that don't need to be, patients that don't need to be brought back for issues shouldn't be. So the beds are not going to be available. As we move forward, why Activ? And why are we something that I believe can enable surgery? The question that you asked, Brian, I thought was a good one a second ago about consolidation. I've been in medical, like I said, for 30 years. And spending time at both Smith & Nephew and spending time at Olympus. I know in the operating room, Stryker, Storz, and Olympus own the scopes. There's other companies that have them, but that market share is not moving even if someone has the cure for cancer. In orthopedics, Stryker, Smith & Nephew, and Arthrex, they own the scopes. That's not changing. That market share is not changing. Arthrex did a nice job. It did change a little when they knocked out Linvatec a little in the details. When you look at GI, Olympus, Pentax, and Fuji own the scopes, and that's not changing. The market is going to consolidate at some point based on specialties, and there's going to be a few key leaders in each of the key areas. With Activ, the opportunity, I don't want to build a scope, I don't want to build a tower, I don't want to build a robot. I want to be able to put our system on all of those so we can provide the data that physicians need. And this is the first technology called Activ Sight, and Activ Sight is basically a little image module that's going to fit seamlessly between an existing scope and an existing camera. By pressing buttons right on the top of the dial, this is where we're going to be able to deliver in first order of measure key blood flow, key data that physicians need. Normal bowel, doctors inject ICG dye. This shows you everywhere that there's blood flow, but not how much blood flow. What it shows you here is there's no blood flow from 11 o'clock position down to 7 o'clock. This is great. Doctors know that. They go back to this picture here on the left. They're going to cut this dead bowel out from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock because there's clearly no blood flow. But what it doesn't show you is how much blood flow, how much dead tissue is around the rest of the bowel. And after you inject once, you can't inject again throughout the case. What Activ Sight allows a physician to do is with the press of one of those buttons that I showed you on the screen, in real time, you'll get actual blood flow data, not just to see where the blood flow is, you'll get quantitative measures, as well as you'll be able to clearly see where there's clearly no blood flow. The low blue in this particular area, you can see where there's high blood flow and you can see where there's moderate blood flow. After you sew back an anastomosis, say in a colorectal procedure, the number one cause of an anastomotic leak is inadequate blood flow. It doesn't say no blood flow, it says inadequate. And hopefully we can treat that with real-time data. Another picture here, I'm not going to go through too much. Picture on the left, this was just done by surgeons. We brought 2 surgeons from Boston Medical Center into a recent lab. What you see on a regular laparoscopic view here on the left looks like everything is full blood. Nice, it's nice flow. You see great, you can see the red, you can see clearly. What you can't see is this entire piece in the middle is we clamped it all around it. There's actually no blood flow here. But this is why a physician sometimes has those situational awareness, because they can't really see it. It's not always clear. You're trusting your intuition. So if you're a doctor that does 500 procedures a year, that's great. If you're a doctor that does 7 of the same procedure, you don't have the intuition to count on. You press the button of Activ Sight and you'll see everywhere where there's blood flow and everywhere where there's not. And if there's no blood flow, that's dead tissue and that needs to go because that can cause problems. With Activ, basically, and I'll end in just a second, where we're going and what's happening. We're starting with the Activ Sight technology, which I shared with you is it's the first product. It offers enhanced visualization. It augments surgical vision in real time. This all sits on the Activ Edge platform. It's an intelligence platform, which basically underpins all of our strategy. Then we get to Activ Insight. This is where the fun begins, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. All I showed you was basic blood flow data. But through the use of Activ Sight, the company is going to capture tens of thousands of surgical data points prospectively that will then be uploaded to the cloud and then fed back to that little Activ Sight image module that I shared with you. And that is going to be shown with annotated markers, ground truth data from all of our physicians. So when I said that Dr. Kim can't be in every surgery, but his data can, we mean that. We'll have over 1,000 annotated, ground truth annotation from surgeons data this year, which now when you then go to using an Activ site, whether you want to program your robot, whether you want to go on your traditional laparoscopic or arthroscopic technology, you're going to be able to see blood flow in first order measure, but you're also going to see the key critical structure and identification. Activ Assist will then take this ML and we'll be able to optimally position our robots. And then Activ Pilot is where we get into our collaborative surgery or autonomous robotics, which is how the company started. The last thing I'm going to share, and then I'll stop, is this data process is really a big deal. And like I said, the procedure is over. Procedure data is uploaded to the cloud. The data is annotated, fed back to the Activ site image modules. And physicians, these are the things that we're working on in the next 12 months, even with this pandemic. And just to share the best part, I guess, and I never thought I'd say this about maybe being a non-revenue generating company, is we had money built for this year based on the raise that we had completed last year. We're in the middle. Within the next week, we'll be announcing our next raise. We have another $15 million that will be closing at the end of June, which we're very excited about from some new partners. So it's enabled us to continue down this path to make sure that we have the data, we have all the sources and all the things that we can provide our surgeons. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, again, when a robot can see things that a human can't, that'll be great for robotics. But I look at the robot, I look at the scope, all is the same thing. They're all carriers. And we believe that Activ Site and Activ Inside can be in every system to allow physicians, no matter where they practice in the world, to get the same visual data before they make key decisions for their patients. And these are the types of things that we'll be identifying in real time, costing millions and billions of dollars. Common bile duct injuries in the US cost over $1 billion. Ureter injuries in the US cost over $1 billion. And physicians do everything they can to identify them, but they're very hard to identify. This is from our lab without the use of dye. With dye you can see, without the use of dye, with Activ Site and through our data, we're able to start identifying these things to make physicians' lives that much easier. So I'm going to stop. I'll answer any questions. And the way I look at it again, I believe robotics have a tremendous opportunity, and I think companies like Activ, we can help take that intuitive surgical robot that's sitting in a hospital focused on a few procedures, take the CMR when it's out there. Transenterics is fighting hard. We know that Titan and Medtronic just got together. We know there's technologies out there, and everyone's looking for the holy grail. We believe that because of what we can identify, we can help those robots that are in hospitals be practical in many more procedures once you've already purchased them.
Thanks, Todd. That's fantastic. I think what I've always really liked about your system, everyone talks about gathering data, but then what are you actually going to do with that information? I love the fact that you guys aren't just getting the tech, you're trying to help people make a difference with that information and make real-time decisions, which is really impressive. I know we have questions from the audience.
Rachel, on that point, I've been asked many times, okay, so big deal, you're collecting data. So is Google, so is IBM Watson, so is everybody. Why you? I said, well, two reasons. One, we have the form factor to actually deliver that data into the patient in real time. Not pre-work, not post-work, not in real time, because of the Activ Site module will be delivered in real time. Two, the data that we're collecting will be the only company that's collecting not just what's called RGB data, which is the light from red, green, blue, anything video, HD, 4K, anything that's available today. But on top of that, we're collecting that with what's called intelligent light, which is what Activ Site is bringing, which is those things that you saw. So we'll have the Activ Site data and data sets annotated with ground truth, and then we have a way to deliver it intraoperatively to that procedure in real time.
Thank you. That's awesome. So one person did have a question about, is this near infrared? How does this compare, contrast?
It's called multimodal technology. There's lots of work that's been done with near infrared. There's lots of work that's been done with laser. There's lots of work that's been done with hyperspectral. And then if people try to take those and their science. there's very few that have been done with all of those plus about 5 or 6 more, and then the algorithms make the difference. And if I was smarter, I'd probably give you a better answer. But that's true. It's multimodal technology, and then the algorithm makes the difference of taking those modes, and it's wavelengths of light absorbed into the tissue and reflected back, but not just of one specific mode.
How's the team doing? So, I mean, how many people are you up to at this point? How are you keeping them focused, right? This is a crazy time, but it seems like you were actually built for this exact time. So how are things going?
It's interesting because I think everyone does well in good times. You really find out who's real in tough times, but the team is remarkable. I was employee number 12 in January 19, and we're over 30 now, and I will be over 50 this time next year. We are growing during this time. We're raising money during this time. We're performing during this time. We're doing our labs during this time because we were prepared to do that. That's the model that we had. And I'm blessed to have great leadership on the team. And while I have a lot of medical experience, to me, it's important to bring in, it's about people, and our head of commercial, she has 20 years in med device. Our COO has 25 years in med device. Our CTO ran robotics for another company before. Our head of operations came from Medtronic and Covidien. So this is JV to him of the work that we have to do. So the team knows the playbook and knows how to deliver. We know the customers. We know where we're going. So I feel that and it's really exciting to watch these young engineers. We have 7 PhDs that, God, they've forgotten more than I'll ever know about the technology. So the team is really excited. We do this call like this 3 times a week with different agendas, and the team is staying together and really, and we celebrate success because I believe in doing that and making sure that each milestone is something that's a great achievement.
All right, one more question and then we'll move on to our last speaker. So how do you predict data sharing being utilized across surgeons for implementation in the OR?
Well, I think data sharing across surgeons is, keep in mind the data that we collect, no patient data. We're not doing anything with HIPAA. It's data, it's procedural data up to the cloud. The data sharing, in a sense, if a surgeon is using, there's no pre-work that has to be done. If you use that, say in a laparoscopic procedure, if you're using Activ Sight, that little module that attaches between the scope and the camera, you're automatically going to get that data fed to you. You're going to see the data from Dr. Brian Johnson and the data from Dr. Rachel are going to be, as they're uploaded, they're going to be there to identify key critical structures in tissue and what have you. And over time, when it's programmed into a robotic system, which isn't an adapter, it's programmed, it's going to just be continual software upgrades. And the physicians are going to see that data in real time. Like I said, it's not data about, we also will identify data on what makes a great surgery and what's not. And we're working with certain hospitals that are big in that as well. So we're partnering with big companies that are giving us guidance and advice. We have a great surgeon advisory board. We have surgeon advisors. We have the busiest robotic surgeon in the world. And then we have people that aren't roboticists at all, and they're focusing on tissue in the ENT space. So we're very lucky to have that kind of a group of people that are guiding us.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. This was fantastic, and really appreciate you sharing with the crew here what you guys are working on. It's really exciting.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, so we have one more awesome speaker up. I would like to introduce Chris Nice from Practice Point over at WPI. Chris, we'd love to hear what you guys have been working on during COVID.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So hello, my name is Christopher Nitch, and I'm a research scientist at WPI's new Practice Point Center for Advancing Healthcare Cyber-Physical Systems. I want to talk a little bit about a project that we've done in response to the coronavirus pandemic in trying to automate the use of a bag valve mask as a response to limited critical care infrastructure in our hospital system. So first off, I just want to talk a little bit about what Practice Point is and who we are and what we do. So Practice Point is a membership-based R&D testing facility where corporate members pay a membership fee to access a state-of-the-art facility at WPI and work alongside WPI faculty and their students. We are actively working with a number of members in industry, and we just opened in January of this year officially. So what Practice Point is it's a number of realistic point of care scenarios where you can test out new medical devices just down the hall from a bunch of engineering labs, machine shops, 3D printing labs, electronics labs, motion capture labs. So that way you can very quickly test out your devices in real world settings, identify problems, make changes, come back and test again, and iterate very rapidly to develop new healthcare technologies. It's a really incredible facility, and we're really happy with how it's transitioned from this vision a few years ago into reality. Unfortunately, though, after just getting access to our brand new facility, as we were ramping up use of all the great equipment we have there, the coronavirus kind of put a stop to things in the facility itself. So in the middle of March, we have most college campuses shutting down, and we all start working from home. And you know, the reason why we're all in quarantine and we're all on Zoom right now is because this is a very contagious virus that results in a lot of hospitalizations. And this virus has really exposed some weaknesses of our healthcare infrastructure. So in general, we have a fairly limited healthcare or hospital capacity. There's about 12,400 beds in Massachusetts for 6.9 million residents, and only a few of those are ICU beds. And so when you have a large number of patients winding up in the ICU in a short period of time, you can very easily stress the system. And so a number of us who work at Practice Point discuss what can we do to address some of these critical limitations, in particular the limitation in ventilators. That was a large concern a couple of months ago. So myself, Dr. Fisher, and Dr. Paulo Carvalho, who is a recent WPI PhD graduate, we teleconference and discuss what can we do to help address this problem very shortly with something that would be very scalable and wouldn't have any supply chain constraints if we tried to produce thousands or tens of thousands of these in a short period of time. So what we discussed was using something that's an approved medical device for the airway path, and that would be what's called an ambu bag. This is typically used in emergency medicine, where somebody manually squeezes this bag to force air into somebody's lungs. We then wanted to minimize the number of components necessary to develop this device. So typically, we work on very complicated robotic systems. We have MRI-compatible surgical robots that sit inside of an MRI machine. The electronics are all inside the MRI room, and they interface with the scanner and use the scanner for guidance and all this stuff. And Paulo has developed probably the most elegant and complicated electrical hardware you could possibly imagine to power that. And we're trying to figure out how to do this in the most basic and stupid way possible, essentially. So what we came up with was using a windshield wiper motor for a car, which has a similar duty cycle to the respiratory rate. They're very robust, they're very strong, and they're in abundant supply. They change a little bit between makes and manufacturers, but mostly they just change in terms of their mounting hole pattern, which is very easy to accommodate for in your design. And then we try to use the most basic manufacturing and assembly methods possible. So all single fixture operations on flat pieces of material. So you can either laser cut plastic or water jet aluminum or CNC machine aluminum to make all the custom components for this. We weren't the only ones, looking at solutions for this problem, and there was some guidance in this area. So we contacted people that we knew personally that work in healthcare, that are responsible for the treatment of COVID patients, to get their feedback on what would be needed, what parameters are important. But the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation issued design guidance for what they refer to as an ambu bag squeezer. It's not a very technical sounding term, but that's essentially what we're making. And the FDA declared that conditions exist justifying the issuance of an emergency use authorization for respiratory assist devices. And so there are a couple key parameters that a device like this would need to produce. So the I/E ratio is the rate of inspiration to expiration. For COVID, that is ideally around 1 to 2, but ideally you would have a device that's adjustable from about 1 to 1 to 1 to 4. The respiratory rate and the tidal volume are also important. Tidal volume changes depending on the person, and the respiratory rate is between 10 to 30 inflations per minute. And then especially important for COVID is that there needs to be some sort of filter on the expiratory pathway to prevent contamination of the hospital staff. So we came up with this mechanical design, which is very basic. It mounts the motor with this cam on it. So the cam sets the I to E ratio, and that cam pushes against a lever, which crushes the bag. So it's a very simple mechanism. There's no special electronics or controllers. It's just a windshield wiper motor and a simple industrial timer that can be basically any industrial timer that you need to adjust the respiration rate. All of these are manufactured with a CNC, with a water jet cutter. So it's very easy to take a large sheet of aluminum, throw it in there, and make a bunch of parts for this. And then we had a couple of attachments that we put on the AMBU bag to make sure that it's addressing the problem correctly. So a pressure indicator warns of overinflation. A PEEP valve maintains positive pressure in the lungs, which is important for COVID. And those are two attachments that you can buy from AMBU. Greg Fisher designed the CO2 indicator to indicate that the patient has been correctly intubated, to make sure that air is entering the lungs and that CO2 is exiting the lungs. So there should be an oscillation in CO2 if the person is breathing correctly. And this expiration filter attachment. So we 3D printed this part that attaches to the expiration path and then allows us to attach a filter, so that way we're not contaminating the hospital environment. And so this is what it looks like running. It's a very simple device, built out of aluminum. It's kind of a tank. It's a very sturdy device. It can be manufactured by anybody. Anybody can assemble it. There's not a lot of knowledge that's required in terms of assembling the device. And it's powered off a car battery. The car battery the charge is maintained with a battery tender. These are common components. It has an inherent backup in that the battery is there if power dips or the battery tender has an issue. And so that's where we're at right now. And so the next steps that we have, we're continuing conversations with regulatory experts to see kind of what the pathways are here. The initial threat in Massachusetts is kind of passed, but there's some worrying increases in the rest of the country at this point, and there's also worrying increases in other countries. And so there might still be need for devices like this, unfortunately. Testing the device on more accurate simulators, that's another step that we need to take, so making sure that this is really effective in respirating an individual. And also exploring additional applications in emergency medicine. So even from the start, we realized this might be an accessory for a bag valve mask that has applications beyond just COVID, but also, for emergency medicine, freeing up an EMT to do other tasks, or providing more regular or regulated actuation of one of these devices in kind of difficult circumstances, like in the back of an ambulance, a moving ambulance. And in particular, I want to talk kind of about the lessons that we've learned so far. So the testing and approval process is still slow for completely new designs. So there is an emergency use authorization, but there's still a lot of steps in terms of taking a device from an initial prototype to getting it into a person, which is good because you don't want, untested devices being put into life support scenarios. But if there really was a shortage in the first couple of weeks or month of quarantine, I think we would have really been in a very difficult situation. And it really would have been beneficial to quickly to have something designed already, something that's already been tested and approved, that you could quickly scale in production for such a case where there's a limited supply of that device. And I think that's going to be an interesting research area for academics kind of going forward is, can we come up with designs for specific critical care infrastructure that could be in short supply during a pandemic or some sort of global crisis, that we've already designed it, we've already approved it, and if the case arises where we need it, we can just put into action the plans that we've already laid out. I think that might be an area of focus for some academics going forward. And in addition, our group and many others have just learned a lot about this type of a process. So a lot of groups have worked on similar devices, and there really is no substitute for real world experience. All the problems that you might face in developing a device like this, kind of trying to accelerate a technology, a healthcare technology at this rate is really challenging. And so I think everybody here is learning a lot about the process and will be better prepared for other scenarios in the future. And people have thought really creatively about how to automate aspects of healthcare during this crisis, how to keep people remote, but still able to do their jobs. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting technology that's coming out as a result of this pandemic. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and we'd be happy, if you're interested in Practice Point, to give you a tour once everything has calmed down and gone back to normal a little bit more. And we'd be happy to have conversations remotely until then. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. That's fantastic. I think, we are right up on time, but my one question, I think to start off, what can people do? What do you need? So where are you at in the process? I know I saw next steps, but how can people in the community be helping? What would be your wish list?
So, I mean, I think that, we've reached out to a number of groups in terms of feedback on the regulatory side. I think that Dr. Fisher is very experienced with kind of the regulatory process in general, but, we're still engineers. We're not experts in this area. We don't know all the specific, regulations that apply, what testing is required, the specific testing that's required, the specific testing facilities, those types of things, or we don't have access to the correct testing facilities perhaps, right? And so I think that's where we really would require kind of assistance going forward, is just regulatory guidance and the correct, approved testing facilities for evaluating these devices.
Okay, great. And I think, one follow-up tiny question. Sorry, I know people have time constraints, so sorry if people have to jump off, but from the aspect of, kind of thinking about this from a outside the US perspective, you've picked components and processes that kind of fit very well and are easy to find within the US. Could that potentially still work in the design that you've come up with for outside the US? If we were thinking of third world applications, opportunities, would you think they'd be needing a new design, or?
I think that this is a design that can be applied globally. Automotive components are very common in most countries. So that's what was part of the kind of motivation here too, was not to have a US-centric design. And in terms of the actual manufacture of this this device, it's not very critical in terms of any of the individual custom components. And so we've talked about this could be made out of wood from furniture manufacturers, which is is easy to find in other places. This could be made from CNC manufacturing. It could be made in a number of different ways, and it wouldn't be very limited to kind of the US infrastructure.
Great. Thank you for commenting on that. I think that, when you and I talked, I think the excitement I got was, this is just a really cool, novel idea. It's a way to take something. I love the idea of automation in hospitals, right? I think it's an area that has not been explored as much, and has been a very high barrier for a lot of folks. But I think there's such an opportunity, especially in a post-COVID world, of taking those mundane, time-consuming things that hospital staff are forced to do, and trying to automate them in ways that are cool and novel. So thank you so much for sharing the work that you've been doing. We're really excited about it.
Thank you.
So I guess that is the end of our program. I want to thank all three of our speakers. This is a really great session. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for all the great questions, audience. And we will look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks for having us.